to investigate the cognitive and cultural dimensions of reading in classical Greece. When you're ready.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this great opportunity. I'm so glad to be here. And hello, everyone. Trying to see. Okay. So we are all familiar with crosswords, I think, where players deduce words from clues and place them within a read. A related game, one I particularly enjoy and used to play often, is the Italian version of what is known in English as word search, I think. So in this game, players scan a grid to find hidden words arranged horizontally, vertically, and diagonally. In Spanish, this game is called Sopa de Letras, which is funny because it's literally soup of letters, a name that aptly conveys its tangled visual qualities. So the popularity of word puzzles has fueled their expansion across print and digital formats, leading to more complex variants, such as the snaking puzzle, where words bend at right angles instead of following straight lines. What makes such grid-based puzzles demanding is the absence of directional cues. So letters form regular, modular, visually ambiguous patterns, offering no clear indication of where a word begins or how it unfolds. So each time we play these games, we are effectively training our visual system to recognize within a field of repetitive squares sequences of adjacent letter forms whose spatial arrangement results in meaningful words in our own languages. So the deliberate use of architectural principles in arranging letters within grid is not new. It dates back to the 5th and 4th century Greece, particularly Athens, in the form of the so-called Stoichedon style. So the term derives from the Greek stoikos, related to the verb steiko, meaning to march in order, and it denotes a row within a regulated linear sequence. The concept appears across several domains. In architecture, it refers to the causes of bricks in a wall. In military terminology, it describes the ordered formation of soldiers, where the front rank determines the alignment of and the number of those behind. The same underlying logic governs the Stoichedon inscriptions, as letters are aligned both vertically and horizontally, each occupying a single square at regular intervals along these axes. The result is a compact, uninterrupted tableau, an alphabetic checkboard grid. So, because the chronology of archaic Greek inscriptions remain uncertain, the emergence of the Stoichedon style can only be established indirectly. Scholarship generally associates its development with the decline of the Boustrophedon writing system in the second half and of the 6th century BC. At this time, multiple writing directions are attested: retrograde, so left to right; progressive or dexterous, left to right, sorry, it was the other way around for the first one; and boustrophitic one, in which the direction alternates line by line, with letters are rotated accordingly, like oxen turning at the end of each furrow while plowing. I'm oversimplifying here, I'm sorry for that, but over time, aesthetic preferences and the shape of Greek letter forms made Boustrophedon writing increasingly unsuitable. The prominence of vertical strokes favored a consistent direction, so that vertical elements could line up across lines. So combined with a growing tendency to read and write from left to right, this led to the adoption of a single, stable orientation, ultimately realized in the dexterous Stoichedon style. Even though Boustrophedon and Stoichedon are often presented as contrasting formats of Greek public writing, they share a fundamental visual aesthetic principle. In Boustrophedon layouts, the letters of successive lines frequently tend to fall beneath one another, anticipating the vertical alignment that later becomes systematic in the Stoichedon grid. A clear example of this is the epitaph of Tetikos, Although not fully Stoichedon in its regularity, it nonetheless shows the engraver's attention to the vertical strokes of the archaic Greek letters, which serve as visual anchors for spacing and alignment. To preserve this verticality, the engraver allowed a slight shift in letter placement. For instance, aligning the central strokes of letters such as iota, theta, to the vertical strokes of other letters such as beta, kappa, and rho. So even if strict definitions of the Stoichedon style exclude any deviation from the perfect gridded layout, it is useful to adopt a broader view that includes offset specimens. These are early, irregular realizations in which certain letters do not fully conform to the grid and spacing remain flexible. It is precisely this kind of imperfect offset arrangement that appears in what is generally regarded as the earliest Stoichedon inscription, the dedication of Nearchos, signed by Antioch from the end of the 6th century. As Rubicek noted, the vertical striation on the front face, unfortunately not clearly visible in this image, may have facilitated the engraving of aligned letters. The inscription is divided into two sections, two lines each, with Antenor's signature in the lowest section. And within each part, the letters are vertically aligned, forming a regular Stoichedon. But the two sections, however, stand in a deliberate offset relationship. So only the first vertical column of 4 stoichoi actually aligns across both sections. Immediately thereafter, the knee of the signature creates a counterpoint that disrupts the pattern, creating a subtle shift in the overall graphic rhythm. In any case, the fully developed Stoichedon style is defined by the imposition of a regular grid across the entire writing surface. To achieve this, the engraver prepared the stone with horizontal and vertical guidelines, forming a checkboard of equal squares. Although these guidelines were usually traced in a removable medium, some inscription preserved them in lightly incised form, so we can see the underlying grid. Austin reconstructs the several types of checker, ranging from the simplest, where each letter occupies the center of a square cell, to more complex arrangements, such as the double checker. An intermediate grid positioned between the single and the double checker has been proposed by Butts for the 5th century Hecatompedon inscription. Based on a more uniformly square module, it increases both interlinear, this is the Hecatompedon inscription. So this grid increases both interlinear and interletter spacing, producing a more open and balanced layout in which each unit is clearly separated from the surrounding stoichoi on all sides. Another variation uses guidelines not just as bounding framework, but as a structural basis for the letters themselves. In a mid-4th century inscription from Epidauros, letters are not placed within square or rectangular cells, but positioned at the intersections of vertical and horizontal lines. So the use of the checker offered clear practical advantages. So by counting the letters in advance and selecting an appropriate grid, the engraver could accurately plan the required space. But at the same time, the grid shaped the visual outcome, becoming an integral defining feature of carefully executed Stoichedon inscriptions. So the developed and mature Stoichedon style has been widely praised for its striking monumental effect, as well as its precise regularity, as it has been viewed as an expression of Greek sense of beauty and order. Notable examples that we have here, such as the Hecatompedon one and the Oniades decree, illustrate the style at its most refined. Yet, despite these undeniable aesthetic qualities, a crucial question remains. How was such a textual arrangement meant to be read? When we play with our word grid puzzles or sopa de letras, we can too empathize, even if only in theory, with the challenges posed by processing such a layout. So at a macro level, such pattern introduces what Harris describes as a fundamental semiological complexity in the organization of the written message. So the uniform grid removes visual hierarchies and internal syntagmatic cues. So it offers no clear indication of where the text begins, how it should be segmented, or even in which direction it should be read. So within this structure, ambiguity is maximized. From any given square, particularly within the interior of the grid, several adjacent letter forms up to 8, if diagonal connections are included, can plausibly follow. This number decreases only slightly after 6 and 4 along edges or corners. So if we imagine the reader's eye searching for a spatial anchor within this visual field, one feature in particular would offer such guidance, and this is the shape of letter forms and their orientation in space. So as anticipated, the adoption of the Stoichedon style is closely linked to the shift toward a fixed left-to-right writing direction, emerging alongside the decline of the Stoichedon mixed layout. This tendency was reinforced by the Athenian reform of 404, when this reform introduced the Ionian alphabet and standardized the letter orientation, transforming letters from reversible shapes into fixed graphemic forms. This shift, however, placed new demands on readers' cognitive systems. Humans naturally exhibit mirror invariance, so the tendency to perceive mirrored forms as identical. This is an ability present from early infancy and useful for general object recognition. Yet this same tendency can interfere with alphabetic literacy. So pre-literate children often confuse mirrored letters, B and B, P and Q, or produce mirrored writing, as most of my own childhood experience and Ben's illustrate. Moreover, the letter in my name, MIA, lack inherent directionality. So I was a bit confused when teachers told me that I was writing my name incorrectly because, they don't have a direction, the letters. So beside direction, other factors may have also played a guide in the reader's eye across the Stoichedon pattern. For instance, the recurrence of specific local letter combinations could serve as cues for identifying of word boundaries, especially at the beginnings and ends of words. According to neuroscientists, such patterns engage hierarchical mechanisms of word recognition, activating intermediate detectors sensitive to letter groupings. These are bigram detectors. So these neurons operate under tight spatial constraints, functioning best when letters are in close proximity and allowing only limited positional value. So this creates an additional cognitive challenge in processing the Stoichedon layout, as the irregular, sometimes excessive, spacing between letters can significantly affect the efficiency of visual scanning. Eye movements during reading and their interaction with letter spacing have long been central to neuroscientific research. Reading speed is closely tied to the size of the visual span, so the number of letters that can be recognized without moving the eyes. And both are strongly influenced by interletter spacing. So moderate increases in spacing can improve accuracy and facilitate recognition. However, excessive spacing becomes detrimental. It disrupts word shapes, it reduces the ability to process multiple letters at once, So while background detectors can tolerate spacing of about 1.5 letters, performance declines sharply beyond 2 characters between 2 letters. At this point, fluent reading begins to break down, resembling to the slower, more thoughtful processing of a beginner reader. An earlier Stoichedon example, this one, the Salaminian decree, the 6th century inscription, illustrates how excessive spacing between characters could make reading more demanding. So the first 6 lines evenly spaced vertically, so each line and interline occupying 1.8 centimeter. The horizontal alignment, however, is problematic, less regular. So from the 12th letter space in line 3 to 6, so this area, so the letters are centered beneath the me, so the M, of this line rather than the epsilon of line 1. This creates a sort of rightward offset. So as a result, the average interletter spacing, approximately 3 centimeters, increases toward the right-hand side of the inscription, at times becoming wide enough to accommodate more or even 3 characters. We have wide space here. These expanded spacing slows the recognition of neighboring letters by placing them beyond the immediate visual span and requiring larger rightward eye movements. So I have to shift the eye. So this offset specimen, however, appears to be an exceptional case, as it is an early example. So the engraver was likely still unfamiliar with the Stoichedon checker and had not fully calculated the spacing needed to fill the entire surface. So realizing midway that too many letters had already been inscribed, he compensated by increasing the spacing in the remaining portion, successfully filling the stone, but at the expense of the initial symmetry and regularity. Measurements of checkers proposed by Austin for around 130 classical inscriptions point to a careful balance between the letter module and the surrounding surface. So this balance ensures even spacing between letter forms and helps regulate the eye's movements across the text. It is, of course, difficult and impossible to apply contemporary neuroscientific models of expert reading to the sociocultural context of antiquity. But more importantly, too much emphasis should not be placed on readability when evaluating this particular written arrangement. As a visual and semiotic medium, the Stoichedon text was constructed according to the principle of visual organization, producing a kind of scriptorial collage whose readability, as we understand it, was not its primary aim. So giving meaning to it requires an interdependent syntagmatics, in which the choices involved in the selection of written forms and visual image are interdependent, and their interplay produces the overall meaning. Therefore, this format may have been immediately recognized as public through its form and structure, functioning as a visual symbolic artifact that did not require analytical decoding. The viewer was confronted with the fact that written language is an aesthetic and symbolic tool used by the Athenian democracy to encode its messages. So, in conclusion, the precise cognitive trade-offs underlying the processing of this arrangement in 5th century Athenian society may ultimately remain beyond our reach. The Stoichedon layout can nevertheless be understood as a form of semiotic syncretism, at once a visual artifact and a textual construct, which helps explain the remarkable longevity, spanning roughly 750 years from its earliest attestations to its final manifestations, the organizing principle of the letter grid proved sufficiently adaptable to accommodate shifting function. This flexibility ensured not only its longevity, but also its transformation, leaving discernible traces even in modern forms of structured wordplay and cognitive puzzles that continue to engage us today.